And a great morning to you all. Thank you for your time today. I want to welcome you to another SafePUPIL Best Practices webinar. And today's topic will be radio etiquette. I'm Gary Studi. I'm SafePUPIL's Marketing Director. And joining me also today is Steve Kessler out of our Dallas office, our Communications Manager. But before we begin, just wanted to hand it to Steve here a minute. He's going to go over some of the procedures on how we type in questions this morning. Here you go, Steve.
Thanks, Gary. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I just have one little short housekeeping item. Everyone that's on this webinar is muted, which means we can't hear you. So you have the ability to type in your questions on a little area on the panel on your screen. So anytime during the program, if you have a question, feel free to type it in. It'll pop in on my screen here, and we'll present your question to the panel and hopefully get the answer that you're looking for. The other thing I want to mention is everybody that's registered for this webinar and those that are attending will receive a link to this webinar that's being recorded. So after this is completed, you'll get an email that'll have a link where you can view the webinar again or share it with people that weren't able to attend today. So with that, Gary, I'll give it back to you.
Thanks again, Steve. And with us today, it's a great honor to have someone so experienced, and we really look forward to hearing some more words of his dedication to the industry here, communication. But Thomas is part of the Lavernia School District, and the people outside the state, it's from just east of San Antonio, Texas. And also this morning we have, of all things, Thomas's mentor in life, Mr. Bill Ford, and he's the communications director in Vicksburg, Mississippi. So Thomas, here you go. It's Thomas Terry, and he'll be speaking today on radio etiquette. Go ahead, Thomas.
Okay, sir. Well, thank you very much. And, you know, the honor is mine. When I got invited to do this, really didn't realize I would have the potential impact that it does. But, again, just a little housekeeping. I'm sitting here with a very good friend of mine, Bill Ford, in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and Bill has been my communications radio mentor for longer than either one of us would really like to admit. But the slide program that we're going to be using was actually developed several years ago and was pretty much specifically targeted to the system that we put in at the Lavernia ISD. And this program will start with the idea of selling the idea, if you will, to the people that would have been the system operators. Hopefully that we'll be able to promote some discussion on common problems and maybe find some solutions to other folks' individual operational issues. Go to the next slide there, please, sir. Face-to-face communications is always the best. You know, you can see a lot in a person's face and their body language, so to speak, but that's not always possible. So we have all sorts of other methods of communication: landline telephones, cell phones, email, and two-way radio. Our district, and I guess everybody else's district, has the capacity to use all of those, but we're going to talk specifically about cell phone and two-way radio here for just a minute. Next, please. Next, please. There you go. We're going to particularly look right quick at, like I said, a comparison of cell phone and two-way radio. And we're going to talk about operator familiarity, flexibility, cost, coverage, and dependability. The first thing being operator familiarity, and we'll go to the next slide. We'll talk about cell phones. Everybody has one. Most of them are kind of the same. And pretty much everybody can use a phone. But with radio, some people, well, they know they exist, but they don't think any more about it than that. the differences between different systems can be very significant. And TV and movies have probably hurt us more than any one thing. Everybody seems to have this idea that you have to use codes and signals and things like that. But I personally am a proponent of plain text, and we'll talk about that here just in another few minutes. Talk about flexibility now. When this program was first developed, the slide, please. There, Steve. There you go. Thank you, sir. When the program was first developed, the left column represented cell phones and the right was for radio. But advances in technology, both systems will do both. It just seems to me and to a lot of other folks that a dedicated radio system will do it better and more dependably. We'll talk about cost. Next slide. Thank you. Cell phones, they're cheap. The initial purchase price, they don't really have a long lifespan. I don't personally know of anybody who has a cell phone that's 5 years old. Don't know of many people that have one that's 3 years old.
Hey now.
Oh, okay. Well, okay, we've got one that has a 3-year-old one. Up to. But, you know, seriously, people get cell phone, and 2 years later, their plan says they can get a new one, and guess what? They do. But radios stay in service for years and years and years. They cost a little more, but the payback comes on the other end. Another advantage of radios is there's no user fee if you own your system. Of course, you have to budget for maintenance and growth. With even our small school district, it is a rare occasion that a month goes by that somebody doesn't want another radio. So the system grows. Once people get used to using it, it will take on a life of its own. Talking about coverage area on the next slide, cell phone services, you know, they're designed to make money, and they're going to save their best coverage for areas that are going to make them money. My school district is a relatively rural area outside of San Antonio, and I'll promise you that downtown San Antonio has much better cell service than rural Wilson County, where I'm at. But several years ago, when we were using cell phones for our bus communications, we had a coverage of about 30% of our area. Our coverage is now 90% or better, and we're covering 20 miles or so, and we've had actual usage with handheld radios from as far as 25. Bill has something to say here.
Yeah, the thing you do want to remember, there is a misconception between a lot of people that a cell phone is not a radio.
Yeah.
A cell phone is a radio. It's a special purpose radio. It's governed by the same laws of physics, obstructions and coverage and propagation that any radio system is. And a big thing about a cell phone is where your base stations on a radio system, a dedicated radio system, will run about as much as 100 watts power output, and your portable units, or as you may hear me say, subscriber units, has gotten to be the term for the actual radios people use. On a cell phone, they're 0.3 of a watt or so. On mobile radios, 30 watts, and portable radios, 5 watts. So that does give you a little bit of better coverage. And once again, they are radios subject to the same vagaries of any other type radio system. Tommy?
Thank you, Bill. One thing for people who may not have a system and they're thinking about putting a system in or upgrading or changing equipment, don't just take the first guy's word that walks through the door wanting to sell you a system. You know, they'll tell you something, oh, I've got a customer right over here, and his system does this and that, and oh yeah, I think we can do it. Before you spend some money, make them show you the research. On the next slide, talking about coverage area, there's a little map there that wants you to look at that map, and you can see the big city of Lavernia covered up with little blue dots. The blue dots were places where I did coverage tests with when the system was first put up. The little green star there amongst all those blue dots is our repeater site. And you'll notice a big blank spot just to the south of that, and then another big blob of blue spots, and a few little X's and squares. That was part of our coverage test. And if you'll go to the next slide for me, please, sir. I think this is the right one. Well, we'll have to go back to that. I got things out of order here just a little bit. But keep in mind that blank space between the groups of dots there. If you see the place designated as Lone Oak, if you'll draw a line from Lone Oak down to Sutherland Springs, and just keep that line in mind, I'll show you what that line would represent here just in a minute. Okay, now we'll go to the next one. Thank you for backing up. Dependability. We're going to talk again back and forth between cell phones. Remember, as Bill said, the power component of a cell phone is very low, but it's usually good. Dedicated radio system is better. Power failures, backup power is available for both of them. Cell phone system is really, really subject to overloading. A radio system can be overloaded, but just like the backup power, we have the option of controlling the load, and we can control the load if we have proper protocol, if we have plans and we follow the plans. The old saying, practice makes perfect. The overloading of a cell phone system has been shown in natural and man-made disasters both here recently. But in September of 2005, there was a lady who found herself in a precarious situation and tried for a couple of days to make a cell phone call. She was trying to call 911, but 911 didn't exist. It was down too. She tried to make several other calls, and after a couple of days, battery was going down. Last-ditch effort, she sends her mother a text message. This text message was held in queue for 2, possibly 3 days. When it finally went over, it was handed over to an amateur radio system, and in 2 hours, the message had been delivered, and help was on the way. This happened during Hurricane Katrina, and the lady was in New Orleans. She spent 5 days on a rooftop. The text message was to her mother in Detroit, Michigan. The text went through finally, but the system was overloaded, and it was just held in queue for over 2 days. Radio system got the message back to New Orleans, and she had some help in a couple of hours. Which brings us to a question. What type of communication is most reliable? And this is on the next slide there. Steve? Thank you, sir. It's been proven over and over and over again that portable handheld two-way radios are probably the most dependable thing that there is for radio communication. They are portable. They go in your hand. They go in your pocket. It's battery operated. You can charge it many different ways. It's standalone. It's simplex communications, and we'll talk about that in a minute, that term in a minute. If nothing else is working, your radio and my radio will talk to each other, and we're not dependent on a service provider who may be trying to get other systems back up and going. And we just kind of fall in the queue. We'll talk about how it works, and that would be time to change there, Steve. Please. Thank you, sir. And one more time. Borrowed this diagram here from a ham radio operator book, and showing the different types of radio waves. The one that most of us are interested in, and I think probably all of us, would be the VHF or UHF wave. It's a ground wave, and different frequencies have different uses, but for the audience that we have right here, we're going to talk about that wave and its limitations. On the next slide, we'll talk about the enemies or the limitations. The distance, the curvature of the Earth. The radio wave is going to go straight, and when the Earth curves away from it, you're going to be out of range. It's not that it won't reach that far; it's just you're going to be under it. Man-made and natural obstacles, ridges, buildings, tunnels, etc. And I'll show you an example of the ridge here just in a minute. Equipment malfunctions, or built-in limitations. Low power systems, they just won't do as much as a high power system. There are limitations to the equipment itself and the signal quality and signal power. But the thing we're talking about here today, more than all of that, is the operator. And familiarization with the system, good operator habits, can make the difference between communications actually happening and not. A good operator can make a marginal system work for him or her, whereas a bad operator may not get a message across, with everything else perfect. We'll go into the next slide. We're going to talk first off about simplex or direct communication. That's simply my antenna directly to your antenna, a base station to a bus or a bus back to a base station. There's nothing in the way there but air, and it works. But on the next slide, I'm going to ask you to remember that line we drew on the map. In the center picture, you see a ridge there. And this picture was taken from the repeater site for the Lavernia repeater, school system repeater. That ridge is 200 feet taller than our antenna. We're just not going to talk through it. It's just not going to happen with simplex. So at that point, in comes this creature we call a repeater on the next slide. It's basically a radio device. It receives and transmits simultaneously. And we use those. They're higher powered. You're talking usually a 50 to 100 watt transmitter on it. It's placed in a better spot with a better antenna, as on the slide. A taller tower on top of hills, and it'll help you see over that ridge that I showed on the previous slide. It allows you to have the bulk of your fleet using a lower powered radio, which translates into somewhat cheaper, and it just makes things work a lot better. Just a few years ago, just the idea of a repeater was pretty foreign to most people, but cell phones have kind of helped us out there, because everybody knows they have to be within range of a tower for that to work. The cell phone tower is at its base just basically a repeater. It has some other options, but it's essentially a repeater. Phil, you were leaning forward. Do you have something you want to add?
No, exactly right. The tower is a repeater. One of the biggest differences between a cell phone tower / repeater and many other repeaters is that cell phone towers are linked one to the other, so that you can transmit to Tower A and our Tower A receiver signal is done retransmitted on Tower B. And a lot of the newer advanced two-way systems do that too.
The only thing standing between your district being able to do that and today is money. So anything can happen in radio with money, it seems like. On the next slide, there we go. Thank you, sir. The repeater, and we just kind of covered this, we pick up the low-powered or distant signals, and they're retransmitted from a better location. And, you know, again, just like the cell phone, the repeater only works with if you're within range of that tower. And, again, direct or simplex, you know, radios talk directly to each other, and the range on that is limited. Now, once again, I've stolen a slide from a diagram from a ham radio operator. Oh, there it is. Had half of it, and then the rest of it jumped up. Diagram is actually just showing town A and town B and a mountain between them, and the advantage of putting a repeater there. On the left-hand side of the screen, there's I don't know if you can see it, there's a car on the road there. You know, the guy in the car, he could talk to somebody in town A without any trouble, but he's not going to talk through that mountain to town B. Nobody in town B is going to talk to him either, unless you have this device between. And like I said, it just enhances the entire system. The repeater itself is a little pricey to put in, but again, it lets you kind of customize what type of radios you put in each application within your district, and you know, use lower powered, again translated cheaper units to actually affect your communications. The next slide is just simply a diagram of you know, the repeater operation. Your base station or your repeater or your mobile unit rather transmits to the repeater. Repeater repeats it and sends it out to the other person that you hope is in the conversation with you.
It's kind of like you know, heard the old thing up in the hills in Tennessee.
Oh, I holler.
One holler over.
One holler over. Yeah, I holler. Bill hears it on that ridge, and he hollers it over to the next one. So.
Thomas, this is Gary a minute.
Hey, Gary.
A quick question. Is there a certain range that a repeater is good for, or is it just based on topography? In other words, you said from Lavernia to that 20-mile radius, is it only good for like 20 miles or just based on obstructions or topography, the repeater?
Boy, that is a loaded question. It depends on so many things. Topography, frequency, power, weather conditions. It just goes on. The height of the antenna.
A rule of thumb
Okay.
over a flat Earth, which we don't have, a repeater at 300 feet can talk 26 miles. That's just a rule of thumb. In other words, from that central or from that central location, the horizon at 300 feet is about 26 miles away, and you can't talk over the horizon. There's sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but that's just a rule, a very basic rule of the thumb. Before you design it, you're really going to have to go in and do some computer modeling of your, location and see where the best place to put the repeater in, whether you're going to have multiple link repeaters, but there's no hard and fast rules.
Sure.
For the most part, frequency, you're talking about the frequencies are going to have a little bit of a difference, but the main thing to remember is that your communications range is line of sight. The receiver has to be able to see the transmitter. Now, that's basically it. That's basically a 300-foot tower, a about 26 miles.
So really, when you bring in people to design a system, you have to plug in every variable possible to maximize your system, and of course, weight it against cost.
Exactly, and of course, when I design a system, I'll usually put my design parameters in very conservatively, and so that you're pleasantly surprised when you put it in. When you cover it. You're exactly right. And the big thing, Tommy mentioned to it earlier about don't believe your vendors. If you've got somebody in your community or in your organization that has some radio expertise, try to get them involved. They may not even be an employee of your organization or agency. But they may have some expertise and may be glad to get involved. Local ham radio operators. If you can find some ham radio operators, they're great to get involved, but you're going to have a project manager on your side that you can trust. If not, you're going to take it to the cleaner. I hope there's no vendors on here.
Okay, I have a quick question, too, that just came in. Does a digital signal enhance the range?
Digital signals, from my experience, is actually degrading to the range. The audio is beautiful, but it's digital. It's either there or it's not.
Or it's not. We have a digital system here in Vicksburg. We've had it about 16 years. We've done some tests from the same sites as both analog and digital, and we really have not seen a significant difference using the same power and the same frequency. The biggest thing you'll notice on a digital signal is, as Tommy said, it's either there or it's not. If you've got a person on an analog system that is 30 or 20 miles away, they may be scratchy and you can hear them. If you've got if it's working on a digital signal, you think they're right next to you. And that was one of the complaints we had with some of the police, but they couldn't tell how far the supervisor was away. But
it is. The digital system, for its audio clarity, is beautiful. Again, it sounds like the person's right next to you, but it's either there or it's not. And as Bill had said, if you got somebody that's on a fringe area, right on the edge of your system's service area, with an analog system, it may be scratchy, it may be staticky, but you can pull out enough information to get the message across. In an urban area, digital's probably beautiful, but you go stretching out into rural areas, and my personal opinion is it's kind of questionable.
I have heard, going along those lines with digital and everything else, and I don't have any experience because I do not have any radios that are affected by it, but January 1st of this year, the Federal Communications Commission required all radios to go what they call narrow banding. And I've heard some horror stories about loss of range after narrow banding. I don't know if you've seen that or not.
I haven't heard that yet, but
okay.
I'm sure it's coming.
People that went from a conventional wideband, and it makes sense. Once again, it's all a point of properly designing your system. You can properly design a system to work. I'm not saying digital is better, I'm not saying analog is better, but a properly designed system is better.
And then real quick, again, then we need to go on, but here's another question that was germane to the topic. How far do you have to place the repeater from the base to have a good signal?
Optimally, you figure your service area that you want. And in the case of a school district, look at your school district, and particularly when you're looking at communicating with buses, look at your bus routes. Find a high spot, an existing tower, a water tank. I love water tanks for repeater installations personally, but find a water tank, an existing tower, or some high spot close to the center of your district, and you'll do better. You don't want it stuck over on one corner. kind of like a light bulb. You know, you usually put your ceiling fixture kind of in the middle of the room. Think about that. And, of course, it needs to be within range of things. You need to make sure that your control stations or base stations are able to reach it. Your handhelds can reach it. There are just so many things. But, you know, in a perfect world, as Bill had said with the coverage maps, the center of the area you want to cover would be the optimal.
I think the question was, were you talking about basically the control station or the dispatch point from the repeater? Was that the question?
Got it.
Yeah, the question was where you place the repeater from the base to have a good signal.
I think you said the rule of thumb was 6 or 7 miles.
Well, I'm kind of, the base station, you're talking about the place where you're actually doing your main, your control, your dispatcher's location, right?
That would probably be what he's saying.
I would imagine. I don't have any more details on that.
Again, you could probably, 26 miles rule of thumb from a base, from a repeater site to a mobile unit. You can get by a little further than that with a base station because you can put a tower and a directional antenna there, and get out, you know, somewhat further than that. We've seen of a base station or a control station to a base station of 50 to 75 miles. The other thing about it is you're not limited from your dispatch point to your repeater. You can use wireline, telephone lines to do that too. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Just so you guys know that you did answer the question correctly, that we've gotten verification that you were correctly answering the question. So.
Okay, great. Okay, if there's nothing else on that, Steve, Gary, if y'all see any questions on that, are we ready to move on?
Just move on.
Okay, the next slide, in fact, the next 9 slides. Okay, make that the next 10 slides, I'm sorry. The one we want to see is says controls.
Just keep going.
Just keep going, yes sir, keep going. There you go. You know, when you put a system in and you start people working on it, one of the things, and this is probably, these particular slides aren't really going to mean a lot to most of the people here because, again, this program was put together specifically for my district and my system. But one thing you have to do is you have to have your operators familiar with their equipment. And this is the procedure we use. We have this program. We go through it. We tell them what each button and each knob does and what each little lit up light means. And, you know, we go all the way through it, even the button that doesn't do anything. If you'll just, Steve, I guess it's, yeah, on-off button, just keep going. Channel selector buttons, volume buttons, just keep going.
Steve.
Like I said, several more slides. Volume knob, channel selection, what the panel looks like when it's on the right channel. Keep going there. Just keep going. It's like I said, this little section right here is absolutely specific to our system. And so we go through this and we tell people exactly what it is. Like I said, even the button that doesn't do anything. Okay, that brings us up to operating the system. You have multiple users on the system, and in the school business, more important than the multiple users are the multiple listeners. Many times I've been somewhere in our community and somebody will ask me about some radio traffic that they listen to on their scanner. So have to be cautious, but the multiple users, we have our transportation department, we have administration, we have maintenance, we have custodial, we have grounds, we have campus intercommunications, and all of them are using the same repeater system. And we separate them with digital or tone encryption, and so not really bothering each other too much. Our system also identifies itself. Every time you key a mic, you hear a little dit-dit-dit, and you know you know what radio's being keyed, and it's helpful in many ways. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But manners, you know, it affects the manners, the way people operate. Just like any other discussion, if you got 3 people in the room and all 3 are talking at once, nobody's going to hear anything except for what they're saying themselves. People saying things that don't need to be said. You know, good manners, traffic flows. Bad manners, it'll clog the system, cause all kinds of problems. Legal, one thing to remember is the FCC is listening. You know, there are all kinds of ugly things that can happen if they find you in a violation. There are fines, there are even possible jail, license revocations, but they really like fines. They're, you know, they're a government agency. They want the money. Again, we have multiple users, and that would be the next slide. When this system was put in 7 years ago, we had 96 units immediately. We're probably over 200 at this point in time. Our system is capable of paging or an all-call system in case we need to make some sort of urgent or emergency announcement. And on the next slide, we'll talk about the repeater again. I keep repeating this word repeater. My wife actually hates the word, I think. But anyhow, you know, what's it mean? You know, I guess one of the first things we have to remember is you're covering a large area when you start transmitting using a repeater, and there are lots of people listening. You know, in our system there are 3 counties that people can hear what's going on just by location of where we're at, and there are other licensees on the same frequencies, and you know, we don't want to be causing them problems no more than we want them to cause us problems. And if we start causing them problems, they'll be calling the FCC saying, you know, these folks are doing things they shouldn't be.
Let me
Go ahead,
add one thing. The FCC pretty much guarantees you a clear channel 70 miles. Or is that kind of a good word? There will not be another channel using the same frequency that you're using within 70 miles of your base station. Go ahead.
That's absolutely true. But you know, the 70-mile rule that they use also, along with the 26 that Bill was referring to earlier, and it sounds like it works, but it doesn't. it doesn't. Our particular system, even though going through the frequency coordinators and everything, like, you know, doing it all right, we still hear 2 other licensees on that channel. You know, the radio's not, again, the repeater is like the cell phone, but it's not. You're traveling with the cell phone, and it'll automatically swap to the next tower. If you get out of range of your repeater, you're just out of range of it. And, you know, you need to, if you're traveling, say you have buses going to a football game, a band contest, whatever it may be, they need to plan their communications just like they plan their route. The buses get together and say, okay, we know we're going to be out of range of our repeater. We need to go to one of our simplex channels and plan to communicate on that. And that way they can still communicate with each other. If you're wondering if you're outside your repeater area, you can try calling another unit, or or your control station or base station. And then there's a thing that's really considered bad manners, but it works. It's called kerchunking the repeater, and you simply key your radio and for a second, let it go, and if you hear the repeater transmit back, you know you're still there. But that's, you know, that's considered bad manners. The next slide, we had talked earlier about the various different organizations or groups using the system, you know, within your agency, within your district. And again, you have campuses, you have transportation, you have maintenance and administration, etc. Well, there's a thing called tone separation or digital squelch separation. You may have heard it called private line or call guard, depending on what vendor you're talking to. It allows, for instance, Bill and I to talk back and forth and you not hear it, but it's still on the same frequency. You're just not hearing it. It masks the communications of others. It's there. You know, it gives you the idea that nobody else is there, but you know, it's still there. And it also keeps you from having to listen to all the other traffic, and you will only hear what's in your talk group, if you will. One of the features I talked about earlier, digital identification, on the next slide. Again, every time a radio transmits, it identifies itself, and the ID is unique to that unit. And in fact, for our system, the ID number is also the paging number for mobile units. But you know, it can help you find a radio that might be missing. We had an instance once where a kid got a hold of a radio and he was just playing with it, keying, and we figured out whose radio it was and the last place they had it, and we got our radio back. But one of the neat things about it is positive identification of the unit. And if you have a unit and you have some unreadable audio, that some emergency situation, you know, or distance, maybe a wreck, or maybe an intruder on a bus, and that driver can key that radio. You can know what radio it was that keyed, and you know, if it comes up at this radio number 123, you can look and say, okay, that's Route 7, and it's 10 after 4 in the afternoon, and that bus should be just about, you know, in what location, and help you find people that way should such a terrible situation come about.
Many radios actually have an emergency button.
Yeah, that is a
hit the emergency button and transmit that digital notification along with a signal that alerts every other radio with a special light or a tone that an emergency is occurring on unit 2546.
or whatever.
Yeah.
In fact, anybody's taken notice of most police officers' radios that they're carrying on their hips nowadays. If you look on top of it, you'll see a little orange or red button, and that's what that is.
And those are becoming more popular on the lower tier radios.
Yes, absolutely.
Hey, gentlemen, there's a couple of comments and questions here real quick.
Right.
First question is, we in dispatch have to switch channels various times because static causes difficulty in transmission from our drivers. We usually have to have 2 channels per area. One is used for regular use and one for emergency use. If we have difficulty on one channel hearing, we switch to the other and use the bad channel for emergencies. Any advice?
Wow. You know, that's interesting. It's kind of what's causing the interference. Is it another user? You know, is it equipment malfunction, location? Wow, that's a real good one, and
I agree with
I'm not really sure how to go about that without some more information. And if
you've got to identify what your problem is, you know,
and we can go from there maybe.
It's Gary real quick. I just simply interject. If the person's still on, there'll be a copy of this recording here, And then we'll also have the contact information on the last page here, and you're clearly welcome to call us, and we'll get in touch with Thomas here or Bill.
Well, that's exactly what I was about to say is we need to get a little more information on that before we can, really say anything definitive. But yeah, that's an interesting question and definitely deserves an answer. And I would hope that if we come up with one, we can share that information with the rest of the people that are on here today.
Great, thank you.
Gentlemen, there is another question. In our district, anytime the driver picks up the mic on the bus, they get a very loud squawking. It will stop while we transmit or hang mic back up. Could this be data being transmitted on the same frequency? What can we do?
Okay, if I'm understanding the monitor. Okay, when the squawking disappears when they start transmitting. Is that correct?
That's what the question says. Yes.
That's going to be some kind of interference within the vehicle. It sounds like. But if they're still hearing that while they're transmitting, they're not hearing while they're transmitting.
It stops while they transmit or hang the mic back up.
Okay, I misunderstood that.
Yeah.
Exit.
Well, of course, the radio is going to have when you go off hook on the microphone, it's going to defeat the
tone or digital squelch. So there's a couple of things that could happen. It could be that the manual squelch is set too low, so all you're hearing is the background. It could be as simple as the squelch adjustment on the radio, or it could be alternator noise or anything else on the vehicle. Yeah, there's once again, there's a lot of variables there. It could be another user in range, and it could very well be somebody that's transmitting data of some sort. But my first guess is going to be, as Bill said, maybe the squelch is set too low. You need to look at resetting the squelch if it's something you have to take into to be reprogrammed, or just an old-fashioned radio with a squelch knob. Try that. Depending on what the exact sound is, my next guess would be something from the vehicle, like as Bill had said, an alternator noise or something of that nature.
Usually data, when you hear it, it's going to be pulse. You'll hear, while it's actually listening. Other question I'd have to ask, does it actually interfere with the communication?
Does any other user hear it, or just that one? That would be another thing to look at there.
Well, we've got these questions recorded, and we'll have some contact information here at the end, and I think people could contact you directly and get a little bit more clarification. Maybe you can help them out with some of this.
Yeah, some of those, especially when you're talking about something audio, a noise, it's kind of hard to diagnose it, especially third or fourth handed. So.
Yeah.
We'll try to help them out if we can.
Okay, good news.
Moving on, the next slide, we're talking about our responsibilities using the system. There's just plain old good manners. As we were taught, don't interrupt other people. Be responsible. Be courteous. The license is granted. You don't own the frequency. I alluded to that earlier. There are other people, and more every day, there are other people, other users on the same frequency, and you have to be mindful of those people and their right to use that frequency as well. The improper, offensive, disruptive behavior, you just can't let it go. Everybody, every once in a while, has something, some smart comment to add after somebody says something that didn't come out right. But we got to learn to bite our tongues, so to speak, when it comes to radio, because once the first person makes a smart comment, somebody else is going to have to follow it up, and then you have several minutes of people, you know, the amateur comedy hour going on until somebody keys up and says, okay, folks, that's enough. Really need to stop it from starting to begin with. And once again, the FCC is listening, and more than them listening is the other people on the frequency that will call in, and the FCC, like any government agency, does like money.
Well, more importantly than the FCC or somebody calling the FCC, your bosses are listening. And I don't mean your supervisor, I mean the public.
Yeah.
Your constituents are listening. And believe me, if you've been in this business long enough, somebody will come to you and say, did you hear, I heard just offensive language by Unit B26, you know, and they're the ones, obviously our bosses, the people that pay the taxes, are the ones that we're really concerned about. So you need to be as professional as possible on the radio system.
And, you know, that just, again, the people out there are listening. And we got to remember, they paid for these systems, and they want them used properly. They're not financing somebody's debut as a comedian. Anyhow, that was a joke. Anyhow, going on to the next slide about responsibilities. The FCC is clearly said what's acceptable traffic and what's not. You know, business and information relating to the operation of the licensee. Of course, if you were running a plumbing company, you could talk about what size pipe and fittings that you might need for a job, but we're not there. You know, our maintenance department may very well do that, but, you know, we're talking about getting buses here, there, and yonder, and other aspects of operating a school district, basically. Checking in, dispatches, coordination of work, and emergency traffic. No intentional interference or jamming of other users. If you hear another user on the frequency, you know, you're really not supposed to try to talk over them or dead key your mic so they can't talk. And going on under responsibilities, and this is actually the last one, they talk about unacceptable. Slide, please. There we go. Thanks. Idle chit-chats, jokes, misinformation. Now, misinformation, that's deliberately transmitting false information that you know or you have reason to believe will cause somebody that hears it to react. You know, you just don't do that. Things that are disruptive, gossip, and profanity. Anybody remembers George Carlin's 7 words you can't say on TV? You can't say them on radio either. And that's where that is. Bill, you were shaking your head.
George Carlin.
George Carlin. Remember George, yes. How can we do better on the next slide? You know, one of the simplest ways to do better is once again the old adage, engage brain before putting mouth in motion. We can also remember that we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth, and sometimes the best thing to say is nothing. We're going to go now and we'll talk about elements of successful communication. And this was borrowed somewhat from the National Emergency Training Center's communications model. I've kind of changed it a little, but it's basically theirs. You have a thought. You have something some information that you think somebody else needs, and so you've decided you need to share it. Now, how are you going to share it? We're talking about radio, so that's it. You put your thoughts together, you push the button, you talk, the other person hears it, they digest it, and they acknowledge it, and they reply. They're actually, you know, there are 7 steps in successful communications. We don't really think about it that way, but this is really how it works. This is a model. You have a thought, you have some information. How am I going to get it to the person I want it to? You put it in the proper format, you send it, they receive it, they figure out what it means to them, and they either reply or ignore you. But they should acknowledge, at least acknowledge and reply. The next slide about successful communication is you need to listen before you transmit. Now, not only is that good manners, so you don't transmit over somebody, it's actually a requirement from the FCC. And you read the regulations, and it says, thou shalt monitor before transmitting. And you just have to do it, just the way it is. One of the biggest things that we have is people beginning to talk and sometime later on remembering to push the buttons. But you really need to push the button first. This, gets things going. In the early days of mobile radio, there was actually a small generator in the transmitter unit that when you push the transmit button, this generator started turning to make the AC electricity for the transmitter. And you had to give it a second or two to get up to speed and make things happen. But, I always tell people, especially after we've heard several half transmissions in a row, I will key up and I will say, push button, then talk. Of course, my buddy Bill, he's laughing, but, it seems to work. Way earlier, we talked about some of the misconceptions that TV and movies have had on communications, and one of them is calling. When you're calling somebody, you identify the person that you're calling and then yourself. Imagine initiating a conversation from across the room. If I was sitting here and I wanted to talk to Bill, I wouldn't say, this is Tommy. Bill, can you hear me? I would say, hey, Bill, I want to talk to you for a second. Same thought process. Say who you want, then identify yourself. And that's common through all radio services, whether it's military, aviation, amateur, marine, whatever, or commercial.
Except public safety.
Police are different.
Police are different.
Police are different.
But the worst thing that ever happened to communications, I don't know who remembers it, was Roger Crawford and Highway Patrol.
Yeah.
Everything was 10-4.
Everything. And we'll talk about 10-4 in a minute. 10-4 has a good prominent place here just in a moment. But anyhow, let's see. Okay. The next slide, we're going to talk about plain text. And I'm a firm believer in plain text. The Department of Homeland Security is a firm believer in plain text. In fact, if you have any equipment that was bought with Homeland Security money, part of your grant says that you will use plain text. Again, most public safety agencies, especially police, have kind of forgotten about that. But 10 codes, it's my understanding that 10 codes were developed in the early days of mobile radio in the city of Chicago. And the reason they were called 10 codes is because there were 10 of them. And they stood for various things. It was a quick way when transmitter time was, it was very limited, and the audio quality was not real great. They just couldn't go into a long dissertation, if you will, of what was going on. So they developed these codes. Signals, I think signals had their beginning in the fire service. And signal 1 meant a house fire. Signal 2 was a dumpster fire, whatever. But
that may have come back from maybe the old telegraph, bell telegraphs, too.
Maybe.
Bells or something like that.
Could have. QSL codes, those go back to Morse code and CW communications by radio. And there's the signal DE means from, and CQ is calling anyone. We've all heard of SOS, that's a distress call. And the distress call originally, just as tidbit, was actually CQD, which was calling anyone in distress. But then you have codes, code blues and code reds and code purples and yellows and whatever. Who knows what that means? But, say what you mean, plain text. Now, we were talking about 10-4. Everybody knows what 10-4 means. I venture to say that 99% of the people out there are shaking their head, yep, I know exactly what it means. Well, if we go to the next slide, please. There you go. January 13th, 1982. I don't know how many people remember this, but an Air Florida flight crashed into the Potomac River Bridge up in Washington, D.C., and there were all manner of responding agencies to that incident. Over 70. Yeah, Bill remembers it well. I remember it too.
I was on one of the committees that studied this.
Simple 10-4 had at least 11 different meanings. And Bill, you want to expound on that just a little?
Well, I happen to have been involved in a committee that studied this, and I don't remember what 10-4 meant, but there was something like 70 to 75 different agencies using over 60 different radio systems, and even when you had compatible equipment, the procedures were so dissimilar that nobody could talk to anybody. That was the main thing. And if I could go forward a little bit on it, you go back and look at the after-action report, the AAR on 9/11. Guess what you see? 75 agencies using 60 radio systems using 90 different procedures. And we didn't learn anything in those years. We do the AAR after Katrina, and guess what we find?
Same thing.
Same thing.
Yeah.
So just to give you an idea, if I put on the radio here, we're literally 200 yards from the Louisiana border. Okay. Louisiana, we call Louisiana and say, we've just gotten a report of a 1050 on your end of the bridge. They can say, 1050? A no? 1050 in Louisiana means no, and on Mississippi, on this side of the bridge, it means a wreck. A wreck. So as we've gotten along, thank goodness, after Katrina, we've gone on to the common nomenclature and everything else where everybody is trying to move towards using plain language, and that's something you really need to look into is plain language. Also, just what's easier to say, and I'll use this, probably been in the fire service and everything else, what's easier to say, a house fire or a 1071 J3?
Well, let me get my sheet out and see what a 1071 J3. I thought it was a signal 11. Anyhow.
Anyway, but you really want to use plain language. And there's another reason for using plain language, and I'll go into it just a little bit. One of the things we don't want to think about is that school district, LaVernia School District and San Antonio School District operate separately from each other in a box. There's always going to be that time, and we've seen it here in Mississippi, where you're going to have the major disaster. And you may call upon your assets to support somebody else and vice versa. There's a nice little book out there that is available to anybody in communications, and I urge you to download it and see how you can fit these things into the book. It's called, into your plan. It's called the National Interoperability Field Operations Guide, or NIFOG. And it's a book that DHS has put together with three designated interoperability channels. So, for instance, Tommy, what happens if you're called to send some buses for an evacuation to San Antonio? How do they talk?
Well, right now they wouldn't.
They wouldn't. But if you put in your radio some of the NIFOG channels, then everybody can talk. They're pre-designated channels. Most of the pre-designated channels require minimal licensing because they're trying to get those all together. So I'd really urge everybody to get a copy. It's available for download, just Google NIFOG, N-I-F-O-G. I think let's see, what do we want to say here? Where do we want to go?
Well, we're going to go with pro words, okay. Which would be the next slide. We pretty well, I guess everybody knows where we stand on plain text. It works, folks. It really does. Pro words. Say again. It's pretty obvious. You know, the word Mayday. Actually, for many, many years, that word could not even be used on TV or in a movie because of the limited chance that somebody might hear it and respond. But it's, you know, you've got a real problem. It's grave or imminent danger or threat, rather, and you need immediate assistance. Now, the next one that you're looking at, pan-pan or pon-pon. If you're a Coast Guard guy, it's pon-pon. Most folks it's pan-pan. But 2 times, pan-pan, 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 3 times. You've got an urgent situation, but it's not really life or death. You need to talk to somebody. You need to get some help. Acknowledge, you know, I've told you something. I want you to confirm that you got it and that you understood. We'll go back to the good old over and the out. Over means that I'm through talking and it's your turn to talk. I'm turning it over to you. Out, I'm through. I don't expect you to say anything else. It's kind of like I've hung up the phone. But then you hear people say over and out. Well, that doesn't really work. I've turned it over to you, but I hung up the phone. I'm not going to listen to you anyhow. They're really just not used together. Roger, yes, stand by, you know, hey, hang on a minute. Wilco, you know, that's an old one. It's I will comply, Wilco. And that's another one you hear people cram together, Roger, Wilco. Well, you don't really need to, because if you're going to Wilco, it appears that you understood it. So that's kind of a, I don't know, you just don't do that. Read back. I want to make sure that you understood. Read it back to me. And radio check. Well, just somebody tell me if you can hear me. Moving on, we all have words that we don't understand sometimes, and we try to spell them. We have a phonetic alphabet that's used internationally, except by law enforcement, and they have their own. They, yeah, sometimes they make it up as they go.
We're using that
right. But this is an internationally recognized code, Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, as opposed to Adam Boy Charles something that the police use. But this is actually practiced by NATO and the International Civil Aviation Organization. Once again, TV and movies have done a thing there. Second slide there, the rest of the alphabet. And we'll talk about numbers on the next slide. There you go. Numerals should be spoken individually. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not 1234 or 1,234. It is 1, 2, 3, 4. Numbers should always be spoken individually. It's too much chance of misunderstanding. Always numbers are individual. And getting near the end, and I know we've run a long ways over. The next slide, you know, if you have something to say it plainly. Remember, people are listening. If something's going on, you don't have something pertinent to add, be quiet. You know, sometimes the best thing to say is nothing at all. Know your equipment, know how to operate it, and know its limitations. Know when you're going to be out of the range of your system. And last but not least, develop your procedures and use them. Your procedures may not be perfect, and I don't remember whether it was Eisenhower or Patton, but one of them was given credit for having said that a good plan executed now is better than a perfect plan sometime in the future. And as far as developing procedures and using them, a fellow by the name of Alan Brunacini, who was chief of Phoenix, Arizona Fire Department for many years, had a motto, and he believed that if you treat all incidents, this means your everyday communications, even the smallest, like a big one, when something does happen, when a big something does happen, you'll already know how to handle it. You know, stay within your plan, operate it within your plan, even though, you know, it might be a little boring, it might seem like an overkill on your day-to-day, but as Chief Brunacini said, you know, treat the little ones like a big one. When the big one happens, you'll be able to handle it. And I actually had one more slide that I sent the guys. It said the end. I'll hush now, but the guys at SafePUPIL decided they didn't like that one.
Just blame it on us.
Well, I did. Hey, I can prove it, guys. Anyhow, Bill, have you got anything you want to throw in at this point?
No, a good communications plan, good communications procedures is the route to handling any kind of problem you have. If you have those, you can pretty much, I hate to say, fake your way through anything else, but it's really true. If you don't have a good communications plan, you're not going to be able to do anything. If you got a good communications plan, something unexpected comes up, you can handle it.
And one last little thing on that is if you have the plan and you're using that plan, you're using that format every day, when something odd does happen, those hundreds of people that are listening all the time, they'll never know the difference. And might just help you get through something without a lot of extra outside interference. And the other thing, think before you speak, because when something odd does happen, your audience may not be within your system. It may not be your citizens who are listening on the scanner. It may be everybody that Fox, NBC, and ABC, and CBS transmitted to on the evening news tonight. That's about all I have. Do we have any other questions?
Thomas or Bill, I have just one quick question here. How would you all handle just an emergency to practice? Would you all put people in a room to go through some of the signs and the lingo again? But how often is it per year? Do you need to do that, or up to each district?
You know, that's a local decision, but you know, you really should do something every year. If you do it live, if you do it on the radio, be absolutely sure to preface or end each transmission with both. Yeah, with something that indicates that this is a drill, this is an exercise.
Only.
A district close to us a couple of years was doing the Shattered Dreams program, and they went through the thing of dispatching fire, EMS, and law enforcement to this wreck right in front of their high school, and they kind of forgot to say Shattered Dreams, either beginning or ending the transmission, and it was a fiasco. In about the first 5 minutes of their drill, they were flooded with parents going to the school. Their dispatch center was flooded with phone calls. The school phones were going crazy. So if you do a drill, for goodness sakes, preface or end or both those radio transmissions with something that identifies it as a drill.
Yep. Awesome. Well, that's good. Well, thank you so much, you two, Thomas and Bill, and we definitely appreciate the audience listening. And again, all this information, we'll be sending a link regarding to get a copy of the webinar, and all the contact information for Thomas will be available again, and we'll follow up in any way we can with all of these questions that came at us. And Steve, do you have anything?
No, I you know, like you just said, we'll communicate with you. You'll get a link to the recorded webinar and contact information, and any questions that weren't answered, and I think we got to most of them, we'll do our best to follow up with you directly. And if you have other questions, concerns, contact Howard or Stacy or Michelle, the people you see here on the screen, and they'll be happy to try to provide you with whatever information you might be needing.
And with that, again, thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Bill, for your time. And thank you all for attending. You all have a blessed day. Take care.
Thank you.